All right, so you just watched potentially your daughter's last soccer game. How
I
did
did.
how'd that feel?
You know, it's so hard to put it into words, to be honest with you, because one, it's sad as hell, right? Like, you go through 18 years of ups and downs and travels and spending time together. And I tell people all the time, like, I loved the celebrations,
Mm-hmm.
but I also cherish the down times, because that's really when you are valued for being a dad, right?
Right,
Because the other times you're like a driver, you're a chauffeur, you're
right,
you're you know a caretaker, but
right.
it's the moments that they have their hardest struggle that you really are a dad. And so when I look at that last night and celebration and
Mm-hmm.
looking at the stats and all those types of things, I think the thing that hit me the most was, am I going to still have those moments to be a dad?
Right.
And so, my wife kind of slapped me around. She's like, "Of course you are. They're always going to have to come to you for
Right.
something,
Right.
money or whatever it may be." But
Right.
yeah, it was crazy, Scott. It's hard, and I joke with her all the time. I'm like, "Look, you got a COVID year. Like, we could take this. We could do it one more time."
Right.
But she's fortunately, knock on wood. She had a great career, was injury free for the most part,
Mm-hmm.
and I think she's just ready to be
Yeah.
done.
Yeah.
So
So messages, enjoy it while it lasts because it doesn't last forever.
that's for sure, and especially you know this too. When you get to college, it turns from kind of this social experience with girls, and you're on the road, and you're traveling, and there still is a sense of feeling a little bit like, hey, I still have my friends at school, and I can still hang out with them, and it
Right.
still kind of feels like a part time thing, even though club isn't. But when you get to college, it without a doubt is a business, and I
Yeah.
tell parents all the time that have freshman kids coming in that this is the first real employment uh, situation for your kid. This is the first time that they have a boss, and they're expected to do certain things, and if they don't, it literally could have a financial impact on them. And so it's a whole different world, and just the way that the athletic departments are set up now, and the way that coaches are set up now, they have to win, they have to perform, and so your kids are now being expected to do things that they've never done before, and especially sacrifice things they've never had to sacrifice before.
For sure. Yeah.
So it's I think I say all the time to these kids, I have great admiration for what they go through,
Mm-hmm.
what they give up, and how much courage and perseverance that they have to have. It's a hell of a lot more than I could ever have for them to withstand that a grueling 4 years of any sport, but for my kid, especially soccer, and being at the University of Miami, where she's practicing on Saturday mornings, and right over the fence, literally over the fence, all of fraternity row is doing their tailgate parties for the football games, and my daughter's sitting there looking, going, "What am I doing? Like, this is not the college experience."
Right. Yeah, that's crazy. Go back a little bit and talk about, her recruiting story and, how did she end up there? And, what you experienced going through that.
Yeah, for sure, Scott. Hers was a little bit different because she was not the superstar on her club team. Here in Atlanta, we have a pretty good club market. She was on a very talented team. She had, and at that time, the rules hadn't changed in terms of recruiting time. So the kids were committing their freshman and sophomore years in high school. And I would say that there was probably half of her club team had committed by their sophomore year. And Delaney, who was starting every game and playing every game, playing the whole game, was a key defensive player, just wasn't getting recruited to the level that she wanted to. So it made us work extra hard. And as raising kids, to get a 14-year-old to think about, oh my gosh, I've got to spend all this time talking to adults, reaching out to adults, trying to get in their purview as a potential student athlete on their team, that was something that was really challenging for Delaney to wrap her arms around. Plus, she was also, I think, suffering a little bit like, what's wrong with me? I'm not being recruited as much.
Right.
So we took the path of getting together and formulating a plan.
Mm-hmm.
When she was a freshman, I asked her, I said, if you could spend 4 years at any school, give me 5 schools that you could do that.
Mm-hmm.
She could name 2 schools. As a 14-year-old, she's like, well, Dad, you went to Virginia Tech. So Mom and Dad, I know that. And I know University of Georgia because it's an hour from us. Mm-hmm. Outside of that, she couldn't name 5 schools. So I took up an idea, and I just said, all right, I'm going to create a sheet and ask her a bunch of questions about geography. Like, if you had to live someplace for 4 years, would it be near a beach in the mountains? Would it be near a big city? And do you want cold or hot or 4 seasons? And do you want lots of restaurants and lots of night spots, or what is it? So I put this whole sheet together and I had her fill it out. And so she got to the end, and there clearly was a place that she wanted to be for 4 years. And I'll get back to that in a second. But from that point, we worked closely with our club coaches to identify schools that made sense for her, or at least programs. And I kind of took a little bit of a contrarian point of view. I'm not a soccer player growing up. I've learned just through her experience. I felt like a smaller Division I school was probably a better thing for her, maybe a mid-major Group of 5 school. Mm-hmm. And but all her club coaches were saying, no, she's a Division I player. Like, she's a Power 5 Division I player. So what I did was I sat down with her and we created a target list of schools and programs. And we started doing research on those to identify, if she came in as a freshman, what was her trajectory to become a starter. And we worked on those, and we looked at coaches that liked defense and liked her style of defense. And Delaney is she'll go through anybody to get a ball. She's loud on the field in terms of a leader. So we kind of identified about 25 programs. And then I sat down and I created email scripts. I created call scripts. I created questions to ask if you got the coach on the phone. If you had a voicemail, there was a script there. And then I worked with her on capturing video, and we got into a cadence after every one of her club weekends. We would send out emails that included links that we could track to her video highlights. Mm-hmm. And we went through that process, and it opened up the door to, I think, probably, the numbers escape me, probably around 10 schools that said, okay, you're on our list. And so we started to identify those opportunities, and we got invited to ID camps, but and we went to one. And I'm not going to tell you which school it was, but it's in the Southeastern Conference. And I walked out of there and I said, I applauded the coaches for, promoting an ID camp. But what I realized was it was less an ID and it was more of just a camp. And so I said, we're not going to do those anymore. We're going to go to programs that really want you and are interested in you. So we did a bunch of unofficial visits, and it was interesting. The school that she selected, University of Miami, when she walked on campus, I think it was the coaching staff, certainly she liked and she was impressed with. They were in a rebuild program, so she liked the opportunity that she would have as part of a rebuild. First recruiting class, felt like, she'd be a key contributor to the program, to the culture. And then going back to that list that she developed, Scott, everything that Miami had was exactly what she said. I want to live near the beach. I want to live near a big city. I want to, 80-degree weather all year round. Mm-hmm. And so all in all, I think the process was hard. But had we not gone through the process of working together, coming up with scripts and targeting, really working it, she would not be where she has been for the last 4 years, for sure. And I spent a lot of time with young parents who are club parents, and I've created a pretty extensive binder, and I share it with them all the time. And they're kind of shocked. They're kind of thinking, whoa, wait a second, we're going to all these showcases. There's coaches everywhere. They're going to see my daughter. And the reality is when coaches go into these showcases, they know who they're going to see, or they're going to look at a specific position they're trying to fill. And
Right.
so for somebody just to pop on the radar, it happens, but it's not an everyday thing. You have to work. You have to work.
Yeah, I mean, you guys attack that with intention, and like it's a classic case of you get out of it what you put in, right? I mean, you put a lot of time and thought into, the approach, and you differentiated yourselves. Delaney was differentiated from the rest of the crowd because she knew exactly what she wanted, and
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
that's
And that,
yeah,
it's important, right? Like, yeah, I kind of remember, it's been a long time ago when I was 14. I didn't know anything. And, these kids don't either. And they lean on us. I think oftentimes we as parents are somewhat delusional about the maybe the skill level or maybe the maturity level of our kids. Yeah, we call it delusional parent syndrome. And wait a second, your kid has their shoes on the wrong feet, and you think they're going to be the next Messi. It ain't it.
right. Yeah.
But I think sometimes we ourselves have to take a different approach, and we have to understand our kids have very little context in terms of what we have, and so we have to guide them through this process if we want to get them to the place they want to get to.
Right.
Now, as I mentioned, I spent a lot of time with our incoming the parents of our incoming freshmen at the University of Miami each year. Do a webinar for them at the beginning of the year. And the one thing I tell them is that when you come into this environment, you got to realize that your kid who was number one on their club team is now amongst 27 other number one players on their club team. And you also have sophomores and juniors and seniors that are playing at a whole different level. And so when you come in as parents, you really got to prepare your kids to expect nothing. Expect no playing time. Expect that maybe you get a minute one game and the next game you're not going to get anything. And I think where problems arise, especially for freshmen parents and especially their kids, is their kids are trying to please their parents. They're trying to please the coaches. The parents, are putting pressure on them for no other reason that, hey, we're going to come see you play this weekend. And they're like, well, crap, I'm not playing. And so that puts pressure on the kid. And then kid's trying to get feedback from the coach. But, when you start your season on August 1st and your first game is the 9th, the coach has very little time other than game plan and get ready for the, first game and the next game. And so, with Delaney, we went through an extensive amount of training the summer before her freshman year, and it was a COVID year, so it was a little brutal. But the one thing I told her all the time is I said, look, for the first 10 games, you're not going to see the field. You just know that right now, so you got to just work your tail off in practice. The next 10 games or next 5 games, try to get 15 minutes a game. And if you get 15 minutes a game, celebrate the heck out of that. And then after that, let's see where it goes. She was fortunate because she went in and, because of injuries and some other things, she came in as a starter. She played 90 minutes. And at the end of that first game, I remember her calling me and going, Dad, now what? Like, should I not think that I'm going to play the next game? And I was kind of like, I think you may play the next game. Right. Like, you might be okay. So.
Yeah, I mean, she kind of blew your theory there, but that was kind of definitely the exception to the rule. I would agree with you.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So, maybe talk about the experience, going on or ongoing and through the next few years, and how she grew as an athlete and as a person, and what your observations were. From just go for
sure, Scott. Yeah, drop off your little kid, and in our case, put her on a plane and fly her down to me, and you're like, oh my God, what did I just do? Yeah. We've all been to Miami. We know that what Miami's all about. I'm thinking, oh boy. I thank her coach, and I thank the program, and I thank soccer pretty consistently, because despite the challenges of soccer, it has given her an amazing opportunity to be at a great school, to meet great people, and be in a program that's pretty rigorous, and it keeps them disciplined and keeps them grounded.
Mm-hmm.
So Delaney's my middle child. She's somewhat of a typical middle child, but at the same time, she's also been a kid that always hid behind my leg.
Mm-hmm.
And she was shy. And so coming into the program, she came in and she was a yes, ma'am, yes, sir type of kid. Whatever you need me to do, I'm doing. She always showed up on time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, she was always the last to leave. She did everything that I never expected her to do.
Good center back. That's a good mindset of a center back. Yeah.
There you go. Exactly.
Yeah.
So that I thought was really interesting, because you get worried that if you throw a kid out on their own, they're not going to survive. And the reality is they will survive. They may not do it the way that we think they should do it, but they will survive. And she did. The other thing that she did really, really well throughout this was that she was open to learning. And so she was open to learning from her coaches, from her teammates, and kind of adapting and building kind of her own style. So from an academic standpoint, she did well until the rigor became so much academically that it started to challenge the balance between playing soccer and then grades. And so she had to change her major midway through, and it was just because the rigor, you couldn't do both. And so that was a little bit traumatic for her. She was struggling with, hey, this is my future versus I have this commitment. And at the end of the day, I said, look, you this isn't going to distract you from your future, but you did make a commitment, so you have to honor that. So now at the end of the day, here's how I'll sum everything up. Her last game, I had players coming up to me and telling me how much they appreciate and admire her leadership and her caring and her being there for them. And that individual stories came to me. And as a dad, as a fan, I was like, man, that's a great leader. That's the type of player that I want on. And as a dad and as a parent, I was like, wow, you know what? This is what it was all about. Because those types of things she learned along the way. And so that's it's cool. I joke with people because I say that soccer gave my kid the gift of courage, the gift of discipline, the gift of determination. What I've realized is soccer didn't give that to them, right? They have that inside of them. What it's done is it's given the opportunity for them to utilize those and then gain confidence and belief in them. And because of that, as a non-soccer player, I have such a love for the game. In every game, it's every sport, as long as kids embrace the ride.
Right.
And parents do too.
Yeah. I mean, that's really the best possible outcome is to get that feedback about your child. Yeah. I mean, I had a similar experience, so it's it makes you feel good, for them.
It does.
And proud. So yeah.
Especially Scott, because I see her in other lights too, and I'm like, that's not my kid. Like, she can be a total pain in the butt, and I'm like, that's not my kid. Or when she calls home and she wants money, and I'm like, wait a second, what are you talking about? You need money? We just gave you money.
Right.
Well, I guess in Miami, drinks do cost $18 a piece. It's
yeah, I can't imagine going to school there. I wouldn't survive.
Me neither.
You and I have known each other a long time. We both know that it would have been a problem.
I'm with you.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is kind of bonus content. The reason why we wanted to connect was to talk about what the project you're working on now, and as it relates to college sports. And so tell me the name of the company and, well, actually, so what we're going to talk about is NIL. So I want like a good definition from you. You work in the space and that, just help me and, i.e. the audience, understand what NIL is and how it came to be and, like a quick primer on, that world, so to speak.
Yeah, for sure. So, I think it's interesting how I got into it. Yeah, I've been in sports and entertainment my entire career. but I would probably have not have ventured into NIL had it not been for my kid, being in the mix, being in college sports, being at a very expensive school, and looking at other opportunities to bridge the gap between scholarship money and cost of attendance, right? And so NIL was a logical place to go. And but I also saw a problem. I saw a problem in NIL in that the majority of NIL dollars was going toward football and some basketball. And the majority of almost all non-revenue sports none of the athletes were able to get NIL dollars. They didn't understand it. They didn't understand what they could do or couldn't do. And so that made me really interested in it and made me passionate about is, hey, how can I make every college soccer player at the University of Miami, some way, shape, or form, understand NIL and be able to participate in it, either by getting paid to do something or to be able to create an opportunity for them to do something they normally wouldn't be able to do,
right.
Whether it be get a job or meet somebody that's influential, whatever it may be. So so that kind of dove me into the world of NIL, and then I became a partner in a company called Student Athlete NIL, which is the largest owner and operator of collectives in the U.S. And we're the largest employer of student athletes in the U.S. And I can talk a little bit about that in a second. But so NIL came about in July 1st in 2021. The Supreme Court unanimously passed a law that allows college athletes to effectively make money on their name, image, and likeness. And so, that came about. That gives the opportunity for every student athlete to go out, market themselves, earn money, and effectively create their own brand and own pathway utilizing their name, image, and likeness. Now, that's kind of the definition, and it's somewhat independent of everything else. But when NIL was launched, all of a sudden you had the transfer portal in college sports, right? So now you have college sports, you have athletes that go, well, wait a second, this team that I'm playing with right now, I can't really build my name, image, and likeness, but this team over here is saying, hey, you come over here, we can help you to do that. And we know people that will pay for the use of your name, image, and likeness. So all of a sudden, all these athletes started jumping into the transfer portal, going other places, and in many cases, making money. In some cases, not at all. But and then with that, you also had conference realignment going on and all these types of things. And so NIL's
and COVID.
Which drove
a lot of it. Yeah. So it's like the perfect storm.
It's a perfect storm. And in many respects, NIL has gotten out of control. And it's gotten out of control because it explicitly says that athletes are not supposed to be paid for performance. In other words, hey, you come out and you make a great catch. A donor cannot just give a kid money for a great catch. What they can do is they can say, hey, Jimmy, you had a great game this weekend. We want you to come out to our business and we want you to do a meet and greet, and we're going to pay you, and we're going to promote that. We're going to pay you for that meet and greet. And, there's implied rates on what a student athlete should be paid for that. In some cases, it's, a star quarterback who's going to be a top 10 draft pick. His rates might be significantly higher than, say, my kid who, is a soccer player. Mm-hmm. But, when NIL happened, the NCAA kind of disappeared. And that was problematic because they were not well prepared to handle and work with the institutions to be able to put process in place to manage the amount of money that was going to be flowing through the colleges, what's called the collective, to the student athletes. Right. And because of that, it's created a really slippery slope where, you've got individual states creating NIL laws. You've got institutions creating their own rules around NIL. And you've now got the federal government looking at, hey, what laws can we put in place to try to clean this up? And I'm never I'm not I don't want to share my political views, but I never want government involved in private business. But
Hmm.
in this case, I think that might be the only solution.
Right.
And the NCAA needs some help right now, some backing to make
Mhm.
sure that there's a standard set of rules that everybody's got to live up to.
Right.
And so, you know, NIL for sports, I think, is a good thing.
Hmm.
I think rules around NIL is a great thing, and that's where we need to get to.
Right. So when you say collectives,
Yeah,
define collectives and how those work.
yeah. So collective is really it was kind of a made up enterprise, a made up name.
Hmm.
What when this all happened, the first thing that really took place was donors got together and they pooled their money and they said, we're going to get this into the football players and we're going to make it known for every recruit that if you come here, you're going to make money here and we're going to pay you as maximum that we can. Well, what they needed was an entity between the donors and the players that would be able to manage money coming in, manage activation, meaning that that money coming in just couldn't go to Jimmy because he made a great catch. It
Right.
had to go to Jimmy because he did 5 social posts and he did 4 personal appearances and those types of things. So the collective really is the hub um, of management of the NIL process. Now,
Mhm.
it's not affiliated with a school because a school by mandate is not allowed to necessarily pay a student athlete for NIL. Some states, the laws are a little bit different, but so they don't have an official relationship with the school, but the collective really works in partnership with the donors, with commercial enterprises, and with the student athletes in doing so where there's a transparent lens by the athletic department and
Mhm.
by other interested parties to ensure that everything is in compliance.
Okay.
And so there's a checks and balances. And so we we started our company um, actually right before the Supreme Court voted in July. And we were one of the first companies to come out and actually set up a collective. And we set up a professional infrastructure. And the founder of the company is a guy named Jason Belzer, who Jason has a lot of different interests in college supporting companies, those in media and management. He
Mhm.
he's a lawyer. He played football at Rutgers, and he's also probably one of the wisest um, industry experts in terms of where NIL is going and where legislation will eventually take us. And so he started the company, he built the company, and what we've done is come in and really are a part of the growth of the company. So our
Mhm.
largest collective that we own and operate is with the University of Oklahoma. It's Crimson and Cream. But we also have collectives at Syracuse and Georgia Tech and Wake Forest and Rutgers and
Mhm.
Vanderbilt. And we also work with group of 5 schools, mid majors, and even some FCS schools who have, one sport that is probably their dominant sport, but they have a large, significant donor that wants to support it. But ultimately, Scott, the thing is the college athletic departments rely heavily on 3 sources of income. One is their broadcast partnership. The
Yeah.
second is what's called their media marketing rights, which they sell off or partner with a company like a Playfly or a Learfield. And
Mhm.
the third is tickets and ticketing. But they also have this other pool, which is donors. And so these are high net worth individuals that help with capital campaigns around development of facilities, supporting sports, those types of things. Well, those same donors are being asked to support the NIL initiative. And therein lies this kind of tension between, athletic departments and the collectives. Like the athletic director, I got to build better facilities to attract student athletes. And
Right.
then you got coaches saying, hey, we need student athletes to be able to earn NIL dollars because I got to get better athletes. And so there's this kind of yin and yang, and it's really not even yin and yang. It's kind of this bipolar approach that
Right.
isn't working. Where it is working is when athletic directors understand the value of NIL. They understand the value of a collective, meaning that this is an opportunity for a first opportunity for them to be able to connect with fans like they've never connected before. Meaning, when they deal with broadcasters and their media and marketing rights and ticketing partners, those are all partners that have the relationship with the fans. The athletic department doesn't. But what we know is that at some of our schools where the athletic director and department really buys into the whole collective model, they're seeing it as an extension of their department in such a way that they can develop a first-person relationship with the fans and start to create programming, sports, content that then satisfies the needs of the fans and gives them an experience like they've never had before.
Right. So then it kind of changes the competitive landscape, right? I mean, it's who can raise more dollars, right? I mean,
fortunately,
that's
yeah. Where the NCAA was formed over 120 years ago by Teddy Roosevelt, right? And he was president at the time, and so he formed a government organization of amateurism. And if you look at NCAA and college sports for the last 120 years, it's probably been as highly regulated as the banking industry or the energy industry in this country. Mm-hmm. So much so that every NCAA school has a compliance officer in their school, making sure that, that people aren't deviating from the guardrails. NIL came in and it blew out the guardrails. And it so much so that the NCAA almost disappeared, right? They just went in and said, well, I guess things are going to happen. And the athletic directors largely weren't prepared. Coaches saw it as an opportunity for better recruiting as long as you had strong donors to come in. Mm-hmm. The game's changing now. The regulation is starting to come in. There's all sorts of theories about every student athlete now become an employee of the school, which I can't see that happening for a number of different reasons, but the least of which is, how do you pay a star quarterback $1 million and you only pay a soccer player $100,000? Like Title IX issues creep in, so I think that's going to be a hard one. I do think that we're going to see some pretty significant changes around college football, and I think that's inevitable. Mm-hmm. But to even things out, there needs to be an agreement amongst all institutions at levels that say, okay, we can do NIL. We can't. I mean, that is going to happen because that's a law. But from a performance standpoint and playing on an even playing field, we need to come up with salary cap, or we need to come up with something that's going to create parity. Otherwise, look at the top 20, top 25 college football poll this week. I think 15 of those schools are in the Big 12, SEC, or the teams that are going to be in those conferences next year, right? So you're starting to see this unequal distribution, which is not what college football fans or sports fans want.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So what about sports that aren't football and basketball? The sports that our kids play, how do they benefit from NIL? What's the trend with NIL for non-revenue sports?
Yeah, Scott. So it's a great question, and it's a significant challenge right now. I think the mindset of donors, the mindset of the athletic department, the mindset of the school is the greater success of our football program, the greater success of our entire sports program. The more revenue that comes in, the more that we can do in terms of facilities and supporting the other college sports. The reality is athletic directors right now are a little bit concerned that if football, for instance, is spun out and into its own kind of semi-pro thing, how are they going to generate revenue to support non-revenue sports? So I think a lot of that is still trying to be figured out and assessed. In terms of non-revenue student athletes that are not on revenue-generating sports, it boils down to this. There are very few resources for them in terms of NIL. You have You have an educational component, which is pretty strong. And there's a number of companies that out there that work with athletic departments on educating student athletes on NIL, what it is, how they can benefit from it, what they need to do. You have a number of companies that have marketplaces, and this is where a student athlete can enroll in the marketplace. They can look at deals, which are mostly brands looking for specific student athletes to promote their product or services. And then, the last part of it is you have some student athletes that just say, hey, I like the challenge. I believe in myself. I want to go out there and market the heck out of myself by doing kind of what I described in my daughter's recruiting process. And that is picking up the phone and smiling and dialing and hoping that a brand said, hey, I'm willing to give you $500 to market my restaurant around the corner. And, here's 500, do 2 social posts and bring your friends in. That sort of stuff happens. But largely, there isn't a ton of NIL opportunities for kids outside of football, basketball, baseball, and it's really up to those kids. Now, you have some schools, such as University of Oklahoma, for instance. They have a 3-time national championship softball team, right?
Right.
So you have some donors there that are very supportive of the program. And so they step up and they pull their money together. Now, it's not the same as the football program. They pull enough there to have a meaningful impact. Then that coach can go out and market to, recruits that, hey, we have a strong donor base and we've built a very strong collective that is finding commercial opportunities for our players. And our players can make several $1,000s up to, probably $10,000 a year being able to take advantage of NIL. But that's few and far between. And you got to remember, there's over 500,000 student athletes in this country. 500,000 competing at the college level. Of that, there are probably less than 25 that are making 7 figures a year. Okay, so less than 25. These are the star quarterbacks, the star LeBron James's kid, Deion Sanders' kid. And there's more to just them playing, at the college level. It has to do with a lot of other factors. But then you have maybe a couple hundred kids that are making 6 figures a year, right, in NIL. And then everybody else is not making anything to speak of.
Right.
And so there's a big misconception of how many kids are making money and how much money is actually really out there. It boils down to, I think, there is money available. You have brands that don't really know how to engage with student athletes, but it really boils down to how aggressive does the student athlete want to be in terms of getting NIL dollars. I can tell you, my kid, she's got a number of NIL deals, some that she generated on her own, some through a marketplace, some that she just reached out because, I said, look, anything you drop in the Amazon cart for me or her mom to buy, you have to reach out to that company first and see if they'll do an NIL deal with you. And in some cases, they send her free product and, she markets them. And in other cases, we end up paying for them. I guess that's our NIL deal. But but I think for the most part, it's hard. I do get asked, Scott, quite a bit about soccer in particular, especially girls soccer. And I can tell you that it is hard. They're even the top schools, girls soccer schools in the country, the Florida States, Penn States, North Carolinas of the world, Stanfords of the world. If there are kids on their team that are getting deals, they're very, very small, and they're typically generated by themselves or they're generated through a local business. But the majority of them are very, very small. And it's, the industry is only 2.5 years old.
Yeah.
The sophistication of the networks, the trust of brands on relying on an 18-year-old kid to go out and market their brand, it hasn't been developed yet. It's not as mature. And so, it's I think for most people coming in thinking that, hey, I have a star soccer player. I have a star basketball center. For them to think that my kid is going to make a ton of money on NIL it's just not realistic. The
Right.
stats don't show it.
Do you see it trending to where it will be a little more lucrative, or do you think it's going to stay where it is in the next 5 years or so?
Yeah, I think, Scott, it's
Probably
going
really hard to predict.
Yeah, it is, but I think it's going to stay this way over the next 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's largely because there's so many moving parts. The real key is what's going to happen to college football.
Right.
Because if college football does actually spin out and really becomes its own kind of semi-pro, then you have athletic departments that are going to have to restructure how student athletes are really taken care of. And there is a movement toward the NCAA allowing athletic departments to market student athletes for compensation, which will, I think, be good, because that's what they hire us for. Or we work, not hire, but we work with athletic departments to do that. But I think that will be good for student athletes, and it'll start to create it. Because remember, when at a university, I'll use Virginia Tech, our alma mater, as an example. They have a partnership with Learfield, which Learfield is a media and marketing rights holder. So they take the media and marketing rights, and they go out and they sell stadium signage, and they're selling broadcast advertisements and program advertisements and all these types of things. And so the athletic department, is not really involved in that. They have the assets now of the student athletes, which Learfield doesn't have. So I think at some point that gap's got to close where Learfield, it has the ability to market the athletes. The school does as well. And if they do that and they pay attention to Title IX, then every student athlete should be able to, in some way, shape, or form, not only earn what their value is, but also be able to share in the greater pool, and so that everybody is starting to earn.
How are they getting around? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
You start to see a little bit with Alston money as well. So, some states allow kids to benefit if they hit certain academic standards. The school is allowed to give them more money that goes toward their education. They can spend it on computers, those types of things. So, that I think definitely has helped.
Okay. So how are they? So does that mean that like Ivy League schools are going to start doing really well? Like they're going to start having to pay all their kids a lot of money?
Isn't that interesting, right? Like they make all their money after they graduate. But so, that's an interesting one. I don't know what the answer is there because that's clearly an Ivy decision.
Yeah.
And if you look at, again, my purview is women's soccer right now.
Yeah.
They have 4 teams that potentially could make the NCAAs this year, which is unprecedented for Ivy.
Wow.
But they're building talent and they're figuring it out. But I do believe at some point that Ivy's got to look at, hey, how do we create opportunities to recruit great students or great athletes who are also great students?
Yeah. I wanted to go back and talk real quick about Title IX. How are they avoiding Title IX right now if pretty much all they're paying are football players? Is that not a regulation at this point?
So it is. It's a strong consideration, and it's probably the largest hindrance for them making every student athlete an employee of the institution. And it's also one of the reasons that there is no official designation between the colleges and universities and a collective or the donors' efforts to, flow money to student athletes. They're keeping a hands-off the athletic departments are staying hands-off from NIL. Right. So what's happening now is because of the collectives, the money comes in. These are individual brand deals with the athletes. So it has nothing to do with Title IX. It has nothing to do with the university. It's between the brand, the collective, and the student athlete. And so that's one way around it. Now, I say that there are probably 80 plus lawsuits or investigations going on right now across the country. Some that are a little more public, some that are, just beginning, but they're all kind of going after, the NCAA's kind of role, the collective's role, the university's role in the kind of this transfer of money. I think a lot's going to happen in the next couple of years as it relates to NIL. But all that being said, like as it relates to college, NIL is still a very individual thing for a student athlete. And we know that we own and operate a thing called the NIL Summit that we do here in Atlanta at the College Football Hall of Fame every June. We have about 600 student athletes come in. We have a bunch of administrators come in and a lot of media and brands. And so there's about 1,000 people that gather. And the whole thing is to talk about NIL. And it's for each of the constituents, there's a kind of a curriculum path. What we're realizing is as student athletes, there are a certain group of student athletes that are truly believing that NIL is their pathway to a greater future. And it's beyond the field. It's really about, hey, I'm learning how to build my brand. I'm learning how to grow my brand. I'm learning how to connect with, partners and corporations and high net worth individuals who are going to help me to build my path forward. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, throw away all the kind of the stuff that's going to go on, all the decisions that are going to be made outside of the hands of the athletic department and out of the hands of the athlete. The greatest thing that NIL is providing is a pathway for these kids to truly understand the value of themselves and really set a pathway for them to grow.
Right. Very cool. I know you got to roll. So we maybe we'll just kind of put a pin in it and come back to it. There's plenty more to talk about here. So
for sure.
Yeah. So let me just hit stop and then we'll kind of we'll supplement it here.
Sounds good.
Next time we catch up. Hold on one sec.
Sounds awesome.